Now remember that today's lecture is going to be part of that too. So this is the one day that you're not going to be quizzed on before you're quizzed on it. So just kind of think of the questions from today as being next week's quiz, but it's going to be part of the midterm. All right? So this is our Art in Rome, section B. It's Wednesday, October the 6th, and I am recording. Okay? And we are in Santa Maria Maggiore, right? Santa Maria Maggiore. So Santa Maria, of course, is dedicated to the Virgin. And it's probably not a coincidence that a council, a religious council, the Council of Ephesus, as it was called, the Council of Ephesus declared Mary sacred as the Mother of God. This has a term which is Theotokos, which is a beautiful Greek word, Theotokos. Theo means God, like theocracy, theology, right? Religion. Tokos presumably would mean having to do with the feminine aspect. Theotokos, the Mother of God. So this is a significant part of the Christian doctrine, that Mary is the vessel of God. Through her, God is made manifest as Christ, that we call the Son of God, right? For those who are of the Christian persuasion. It's the 5th century, 430 AD. Right? So the empire of the West is in dramatic decline. The Eastern Empire has a new capital named Constantinople, right? And it will thrive far into the future, whereas the Western Empire is going to fall and be overrun by barbarians in a long, drawn-out decline, which is already, it's in the middle of it, okay? The miracle on this hill of that relates to this church is that snow fell in the summer. And a pope named Sixtus III supposedly traced in that snow the outline of a basilica. The miracle of the snow in the middle of the summer. And that led to the construction of the church. Okay? So, of course, the church has gone through many, many changes and alterations and additions. But its primary structure, the columns that we see here, its form, which with the large nave connected to the side aisles, the roof, and by roof I don't mean the ceiling. The ceiling, you could say, hides the roof, right? The ceiling is suspended. The roof, the dimensions, this is all original. This is, as far as I know, the only one. So remember, we saw the ruins in the Baths of Trajan, excuse me, not the Baths of Trajan, the Market of Trajan, the Basilica Ulpia, and all there was some of the floor and some fragments of columns. So here we are in a standing basilica, right? So it's a unique opportunity in that sense, okay? Now, the other thing that's significant here is that there are decorations that survive from that time. So not only the structure, but some of the mosaics, okay? Now, look behind me. Unfortunately, they're high up in these square frames. There's, I don't know, there must be 20 of them on either side. These mosaics, these smallish framed mosaics, are original. Now, of course, again, like anything, they've been altered, they've been damaged, they've been restored, but the fundamental pictures are original, and they show us Old Testament stories, okay? Most important being, or the most memorable that everybody knows, being Moses, right? The stories of Moses, right? Now, the Old Testament is, of course, we can call that the Hebrew Bible, and Christ coming along, and now we have the New Testament, that's the addition. So everything that happens in the Old Testament, every story, takes on a new perspective and a new significance from the Christian point of view. And all those old prophets, such as Moses, are related to Christ through that interpretation. So that's why we have a Bible that's so thick, because the New Testament reflects and goes back to the Old Testament as its roots. You could think of it like a tree. The roots of the Old Testament, and they spread out in so many directions, all these different characters with all these names, Jethro, Aaron, Ezekiel, Jonah, on and on. Jonah is in fact an excellent example. This is just an aside. What happened to Jonah? He's swallowed by a fish. After 3 days he's spit out. What happened to Christ after his death on the cross? He's buried, and after 3 days he's resurrected. So that journey to the dark, and then that return, it's in Jonah, and now in the New Testament it's in Christ. So that's a great example that shows you how the Old Testament of the Bible is reflected in the New. Okay? So this is part of the reasoning why you'd have Old Testament stories, because they're now seen from this Christian point of view. Right? Every victory in the Old Testament becomes a victory of this inevitable arrival of Christ. Right? So that's on a symbolic level. Now, as far as the style, one of the things that connects these panels up here, and you can see all these figures in rows in these two registers, is there are texts that survive from the same period, 5th century illustrations that are a very similar style. And in this style, you have people dressed like what? They're dressed like ancient Romans. They wear togas, they wear uniforms, Roman soldiers, and so on. So stylistically, there's a similarity there. Okay. Now, let's go up to the front. Oh, in fact, this is something that you need to add to that the architectural terms. We forgot about it, but I did mention it last week. What is this over here? The curved portion, what do we call that? Just like ancient Rome? The exedra is the round part, the curved part, but I mean the curve in a vertical sense, going up like that. That's not the exedra, that's the apse. It connects to the apse, but the part that's in front. Remember in ancient Rome, they go walking through it for their big parades? Arch. The arch, but what kind of arch? Huh? No, the cornice is the flat horizontal that you see like that. No, it's a description. It's a triumphal arch. It's called a triumphal arch. So it's just the same description as those Roman arches, which are actual three-dimensional buildings. But this is a triumphal arch because, again, it's that idea of the triumph of Christ, right? Okay, so let's go up and take a good look at the story that's at the front, because since the church is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, the stories are the stories of the Virgin. Okay, so let's walk up to the front. Going to start recording again. So we've come up close to the triumphal arch, which is also the 5th century. Okay, you can see opposite us more of these stories of Moses, and you see where this archway cuts into the wall to connect to this chapel. Everybody see where I'm pointing? That's where some of those panels were sacrificed, and the same thing behind you, right? But here, actually, you can get a closer look. I mean, even though it's still far away, you can see all those figures wearing their Roman-style clothing in the squared portion, right? Now, but back to the arch and the story of Mary. Okay, so look at the very top, the first register. Okay, now we saw at the column of Trajan. How was the column of Trajan illustrated? What was it supposed to kind of copy? Do you remember? In its form? a scroll, an unwinding scroll. Now on a flat surface, if you're going to have that same kind of comic strip form, it's going to be flat and it's going to continue across, and that's what this does. So that same idea of like a scroll unrolling, but now it's obviously not a spiral because this is a flat surface on the triumphal arch. And Christmas is around the corner. Where's the beginning of the story of Jesus before his birth? What happens? And this, of course, these stories you'll see again and again, especially in the Renaissance and elsewhere. What's the first thing that happened to Mary? Anybody? You a bunch of pagans, you guys? The angel comes, Gabriel. What did Gabriel say to Mary? Yeah, you're going to be the mother of God. You're going to be the mother of baby Jesus, right? So, look at the first register. You can see Mary sitting, dressed again like a priestess, dressed in gold. And what can you see right above her head? Huh? Speak up. Is there a star? It's a dove. It's a dove. What does the dove represent? What does the bird represent? I know you guys remember, because, huh? Well, the dove of peace is another example. No, the Holy Spirit. Aiden got that correct. It's the Holy Spirit. And this is shown again and again in these different versions of the same story. The Holy Spirit enters her. That's a fancy way of saying that God has impregnated her. You know, think of Hercules is not that different. Zeus, the god, impregnates a human female and gives birth to a demigod. So the idea of a god impregnating a woman and then her giving birth to a magical, powerful person, you know, it's an archetype. It's not specific to Christianity or any other religion. It's a mythological archetype, right? Are you guys just like, do you all like photographic memories? I don't know. Now, those three guys on the right, to the right of her, those are the angels that are informing Joseph, because that's kind of a problem if you're the husband and your wife is pregnant and you weren't involved. So naturally the angels are telling him, right? And there are these unusual buildings. Now the next one below, okay, this is Jesus has been born. So again, there's this idea of like a prince. He's placed on this bed-like throne, right? And there are angels behind him and the Virgin. And these two figures on the right and then another one on the left, they're very colorful. You see the bright orange and reds of their clothes. So who are the famous people that come to visit baby Jesus? The wise men, the wise kings, astrologers, right? And of course, it's because of them that King Herod wants to know where baby Jesus is, because he wants to kill him because he's jealous of this so-called king of the Jews. He's supposed to be the king of the Jews, right? So the next level down, you have a figure on the left sitting, you have a soldier in the middle, and then you have a bunch of women on the right. Can you see what the women are holding? They're holding babies, right? And it's interesting, and you'll see this more easily when you find photos of this, because for your Google map, I expect you to find photos of this that you insert into your point of interest, okay? Because obviously we can't see it very well from here, but there's acceptable photos online just anywhere, okay? All you have to do is Google Santa Maria Maggiore, Triumphal Arch, Story of the Virgin, and press images, and you'll find all kinds of them. And then you'll be able to just collate those with these notes, with my explanation. So the interesting thing about the babies there is that they're wearing different clothes, different kinds of colored clothes, just like those wise men are wearing different colored clothes, because color is rank. The quality of the fabric you're wearing is rank. Purple was only, for example, for royalty, right? So the color of the clothes that you were allowed to wear showed your rank. And this is true in the Middle Ages. This is true in ancient Rome. It's true in other ways today, I suppose, with other status symbols that people can afford to show the world, right? Now, an interesting thing about Herod, he's on the left. Look at his head. Can you girls see him? You can't see him. You'll need to step up for just a moment and take a look at him. Look at King Herod. What does he have on his head? Does he have a crown? I'm talking about the third level down, the big figure on the left. It's a halo. And it's not because he's a saint, and it's not because he's dead, because a halo, before it has a Christian significance of being holy, it symbolizes that he's a king. So it's that idea of having, the rays of the sun coming out of your head just like a god, or something like that. So it's not specifically Christian. Okay? And then the last one at the bottom, you can see what city it is. If you look carefully, you can see the name. Can you see the writing? What's the name of the city? Jerusalem. Now, this is the 5th century, okay? 2 centuries later, Jerusalem would be conquered by the Arabs, and it would become a Muslim city. To this day, there's the Dome of the Rock, which is a mosque. So you see that shiny dome at the top where the Hebrew temple once stood, right? So this is long before any of that. So from the point of view of the 5th century, Jerusalem had become a fully Christian city. And if you look at the gateway to the city, what can you see inside? What can you see through the gate of the city of Jerusalem there, and all the sheep that want to go in, which are, of course, the faithful? What can you see through the gate? They're columns, because there's a city in there. And this is a Roman city. Remember, this is the 5th century, so you have a temple structure back there and all kinds of buildings that are based on because imagine, in the 5th century here in Rome, even though those pagan temples were no longer being used, or they were practically all being closed down, they all still stood. So the city that we think of as Imperial Rome still existed when this building was built. So that's reflected in the illustration, okay? And it's hard to see, but directly over the gateway, there's hanging an object, and the object that's hanging is a cross, because it's now a Christian city, okay? Now below that, and in the apse, we go ahead almost, 800 years later, okay? 1300, the artist who designed the massive mosaic that we see there is Toriti, Jacopo Toriti, okay? And it's Christ crowning Mary in heaven. So again, it's the same idea, the celebration of Mary. Jacopo Toriti, Jacopo is with a J, so that's just like Jacob with a P though. So Jacopo Toriti, Torriti, Jacopo Toriti, okay? So now this is a later edition, okay? And below it, we have episodes from the life of Mary, and this would be, one way of calling it is her death. They don't usually say the death of Mary because it doesn't sound nice, but the idea of her end of her earthly life, right? That's all I'll say about that. But a couple elements, if you look at that second triumphal arch, there's some elements up there that if you look carefully, I want you to tell me what they are because you've seen them last week. So come closer, fellows. And what elements can you see in that inner triumphal arch, which means the external part? There's a few things that we've seen. Can you see over there on the right? Remember the symbols of the Gospels? What are the symbols of the 4 Gospels of the New Testament? The angel, yeah, the lion is one, and there's the bull. Now, what Gospels do they represent? Remember the lion is it's also the symbol of Venice because of the patron saint of Venice. Who is it? Saint Mark. That's right. So Saint Mark, his symbol of the Gospels is the winged lion. The bull, anybody know? Luke. Yeah. It's okay if you look at your old notes. The main thing is that you remember it and you keep doing this until you absorb it. So Luke, of course, is the bull, and then the angel, which is the human figure, is Matthew, and then the eagle would be John. So there you go. The 4 Gospels, we can see 2 of them. And then you can see those 3 sticks. They look like those lines. There's 3 lines and there's 4 lines. What are those? You see what I'm talking about? Look at the curve of the inner arch where it's blue, and then there are some objects. There's 3 objects there, and then there's 4 on the other side. What are those? Huh? They give light. The 7 candelabra of the apocalypse. And why is light significant? What do they call Christ? The light of the world. So again, it's that idea of illumination, blessing, and so on. Okay? All right, now let's just go around the other side and see a few of the other ones that are out of view here. Excuse me. Okay, just follow me right over here, everybody. Okay, come closer again. Now, the top register, this is Mary who takes baby Jesus to the temple. So this is a premonition of his future being a prophet. And then on the right, there's another building, and you see the man lying down? And the angel next to him, that's warning Joseph that they're coming to kill all the children, and that's when they flee to Egypt. So this again is part of the story of Christ, is when Christ, Mary, and Joseph, they flee to Egypt, and all the little boys are murdered by Herod because he wants to kill this supposed king. Right? The next one down, where you see the guy in black, who's a kind of an emperor type person. This is an apocryphal story. So this is an important word, apocryphal. Apocryphal. A-P-O-C-R-Y-P-H-A-L. Apocryphal. What that means is, for example, there's a gospel called the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is a sacred text that goes back to the same biblical period, but it's not officially in the Bible. So there's all kinds of apocryphal texts that are not considered scripture, but they could have, and maybe they did in earlier periods. So this King Africanus of Egypt acknowledges Christ as the Messiah, right? And so this is a story that nobody really hears of today, because unless you're specialized in apocryphal scripture, right? So apocryphal means it has some relevance, but it's not officially recognized, right? So the next one down, you see the 3 wise men visiting Herod again. So that's the idea of, when they're searching for baby Jesus. And then the one at the very bottom is the other sacred city. What's the other sacred city in the story? Jerusalem and Bethlehem. So it's Bethlehem, right? And the same kind of idea. Okay. Now, we've talked about the cult of the emperors in the past. In the Christian period, you have the cult of the relics. The cult of relics. So you know what a relic could be for a Christian? Any idea? It's anything that's considered to have this sacred power, like people would actually venerate and pray to it. So it could be the bones of a saint. And to this day, you can go into any number of churches and see little altars with bones. And here in Santa Maria Maggiore are supposedly pieces of the manger. that bucket thing that the animals ate out of that baby Jesus was placed in as his cradle. So this, presumably it was a wooden object, so pieces of that were found and they were brought back to Rome, and down here below is this container. So it could be pieces of the manger, pieces of the crucifix, bones of a saint. Even in the Middle Ages, people took dirt from the Holy Land. So if you had they might have a little vial around their neck with some dirt from Jerusalem, or a little piece of wood that somebody told them was a piece of the cross. These things were totems. They had a magical power, right? So the cult of the relics is a big part of why certain churches get built. Here in Rome, there's a church of the Holy Cross. What do you think they keep in there? A piece that's believed to be of wood that's supposedly the very cross that Jesus was crucified on. And here in Santa Maggiore, there's a piece of this.
Is it down there?
Yeah, it's down there. So you can go down there in a minute. In fact, let me turn this off. Okay. I don't want to. Okay. Now, who can remember the name of the Pope that I said who built Santa Maria Maggiore in the 5th century? Anybody? Sixtus the Third. You spell that Sixtus, Sixtus the Third. Okay. Now, many centuries later, there'd be another pope named Sixtus the Fourth, and guess what he built? Sixtus the Fourth built the Sistine Chapel. So, one of the most famous works of the Renaissance that everybody's heard of, the Sistine Chapel, is named for the pope that built it, Sixtus the Fourth, and that's in the 1470s. Now, another century or so goes by, plus, and there's another Sixtus. His name is Sixtus the Fifth. Sixtus V, we're in his so-called Sistine Chapel. No one calls it the Sistine Chapel because they don't want to confuse it, but this was built by Sixtus V. He was Pope from 1585 to 1590. Okay? So, as you see, we're jumping ahead for this section of our visit today. We're now in, generally, what do we call that period, artistically speaking, the very late 1500s? Anybody? It's not Baroque yet, but it's late Renaissance, which also has another name?
Oh, Mannerism.
Mannerism. So the late 1500s is that transition between Renaissance and Baroque. So Mannerist, just as a basic idea, okay? So, and you see here, a lot of these elements that we see in the Baroque, maybe not as I think one difference would be when you look at all the marble inlay and everything, it's fairly symmetrical and angular. You don't have that massive, crazy curviness that you're going to see another 40 years later, right? Imagine these columns and other elements of this were taken from ancient Rome. He dismantled a Roman structure near the Colosseum and had all the materials used here. So this is the late 1500s. They're still ransacking ancient Rome. Sixtus V is the reason why he's significant for us, and this is really important. It's a great reminder of the Pope, not just as a religious leader, but as a political leader. He was only Pope for 5 years, 1585 to 1590. But in that period, he reorganized the church government, its finances. He put an end to the banditry that had been infesting the countryside. Imagine Rome, where there's not a lot of productivity, right? What was, just like tourism today, what was the tourism of those past centuries? What kind of tourists came to Rome, do you think, in the Middle Ages in the 1500s? Why did people come here? It was the center of religion, Christianity, pilgrims, right? So if you have bandits that are robbing people, that's bad for business, right? So what did Sixtus V do? He made war on all those bandits and then chopped off their heads and put all their heads along the gates of the city. So it was a nice reminder, an effective reminder to everybody, that it does not end well if you want to be a robber, right? So that was the way this Pope was. And look at him. This is his tomb, and there he is. You can see, I'd say a pretty strict, severe figure, and we've talked about the archetypes of that. Now, I wanted to specifically point out this panel. What do we call this kind of sculpture here? A relief. This is a relief. This is, I'd say, a pretty high relief. It's sticking out quite a bit, right? The elements. Now, look carefully. What do we see in the background? Way back there, what can you see? There's aqueducts. Sixtus V rebuilt an aqueduct. Imagine, and I've mentioned this, ancient Rome had 11 aqueducts. They were all falling apart and broken by this time. Sixtus rebuilt one of them, and it's called the Aqua Felice for his name. His family name was Felice, right? Or at least part of his family name. I'd have to double check. But in any event, here's another example of the Pope being a civic leader, bringing these services to Rome. We saw another example. What was the other example we saw on our very first day? I'm doing this to make you review. A perfect example of something a Pope built to provide services to the city. It was the very first thing one of the first things we saw.
Who's the aqueduct on Giancolo Hill? I don't remember.
On the Gianicolo Hill, what's the name of it that we saw near the university? It's a fountain, huh? Paul V, the fountain of Paul V. The Aqua Paulina, the fountain of Paul V, because he too rebuilt an aqueduct. Okay? So you definitely, you need to be able to, when you see the photo on the exam of the Pauline fountain, you need to be able to say what it is. You need to say this is the monumental fountain built by Paul V Borghese to provide water, and then the approximate date, the 1600s. Okay, earliest. Anyway, so that's what's happening in the background. Oh, and some people getting their heads. Look at these guys carrying some heads. So that would be presumably, defeating the lawlessness, right? Chopping off the heads of the bad guys. And then these two figures in the front, these two women, are fundamental. And you probably recognize some of the symbols. Look at the one on the left. What is she holding? She's holding a few things. What is she holding?
Scale.
Huh? She's holding the scales. The scales, what do those represent? And this is true throughout many periods. You can go back to ancient Egypt and see where there's a figure in the underworld with a scale weighing the souls. But here, and in the modern world, this has been at least for a few centuries, when you see a woman holding scales, she represents, anybody know? Or anybody remember? Justice. It's the idea of fairness when you're applying justice. And so this is exactly what you see, the application of justice with a sword and the scale. Right? So the idea is that justice is fair. Oftentimes in the modern era, she's blind as well, because the idea is justice is blind, meaning everybody gets treated before the law equally. Ideally, right? Obviously in real life it's different. And then on the right, what is this woman holding? Can you see what she's holding over there on the right? This. Yeah, no, I don't think it's a torch. I think what she's holding on the left. Yeah, that could be a torch. That could be that she's lighting a fire, but I'm not sure. But what you see on the right, though, what is she holding on the far right? It looks like a kind of a tube. Can you see what's coming out of the top? What?
Cornucopia.
Cornucopia. Yeah, that's great. You knew the word cornucopia, which just means horn of plenty, a horn of plenty, a cornucopia. And if you have a bunch of food and stuff, what is that? What do you think that would mean for a pope to have the woman that represents abundance and providing food? That as a political ruler, do you want your subjects on an empty stomach or not? You want people to have a full stomach. I mean, otherwise you don't last long. So he is providing security, he's providing water, he's providing justice, and he's providing food security. Right? So those are the symbols. So the woman, that's the abundance, the woman, that's justice, and then the actual image of the aqueduct and so on, and defeating all of these bandits. These are all showing us his achievements. Right? And that's what this is. So it's a great example, I think, of a pope showing himself and his attributes, which are not specifically religious. And of course, he's shown, in prayer as well. Okay, do you guys have any questions? Okay, so we're in a church called Santa Prassede, just across the street from Santa Maria Maggiore, Santa Prassede, Prassede. And Prassede is actually an early Christian martyr in a family of martyrs whose bones were moved here, and the church was built. And that was in approximately the 9th century, early 9th century period. So talking about the cult of the relics, right? And in fact, just like the other church, you can see that there's this lower area that one would go down into to pray at such relics, right? So the church goes back to that time. The Pope who built its name is Pascal, which you could spell it, I guess, Pascal. And an interesting thing, and the main reason I brought you here is because we'll be visiting the Vatican eventually, and the great church, the most famous church perhaps in the Catholic world, is St. Peter's Basilica, which is built on top of the tomb of St. Peter, again, for the relics. Now, the great Basilica of St. Peter's, where Michelangelo, among others, contributed to its construction and design, is a rebuilt church. It was rebuilt in the Renaissance period. Totally, completely, right? The original church that goes back to Constantine's time is gone. So this is an interesting church because this is based, it's practically a miniature scale version of the original Basilica of St. Peter. So think about the timing. The original St. Peter's goes back to the 300s, the late Roman Empire, and that's a basilica, right? Now, approximately 600 years later or so, this Pope makes a miniature version of St. Peter's, right? And what that includes is what you could call a triumphal entranceway. You can see at the bottom there's a stairway there. Unfortunately, it's not open in this period. It used to be you could go out here, but it's not open lately. And we'll see an archway out front, which has that idea of a triumphal entrance. Then it comes into the garden. Now, what does a garden mean for the Christians, do you think? We've seen examples in the mosaics. Do you remember? What can a garden represent? I mean, is it a good thing, or is it a negative or a positive thing, first of all, do you think? A garden. Positive. Obviously, it's positive. You know, you've got, like, what's the most famous garden in these stories? The Garden of Eden, which is paradise. And then heaven, the idea of the eternal reward for those who, go to heaven, such as martyrs, is also paradise, right? And how do you show paradise? There's usually the fruit trees and abundant water and date trees and all that stuff, right? So the little garden, you have this kind of ascension coming up those stairs. And remember, where did we see that idea of going up was Trajan's column. There was that idea of ascension. And where else regarding the constructions? Remember, the buildings raised up on foundations? Temples. Temples are higher up on a foundation. Why? To be closer to heaven, the idea of being higher up. So here you see incorporated into this building that idea of rising up. And we come up into a garden, a closed garden, protected, walled in. The Garden of Eden has that idea, right, of being kind of protected. And I suppose you could say the same thing of paradise. Not everybody's allowed into paradise either. Only the saved are, right? and then the house of God. Right? So this structure goes back to that time. The mosaic in the back, we can't see it very well, but it has a deep blue background. Where have we seen that? The mosaics with the deep blue backgrounds? You need to remember, because you need to remember those terms. You can look at your notes, but what was the most famous, the very first one we saw? Dedicated to the two patron saints of medicine. Remember their names?
Was it in a church or was it?
No, I'm talking about the church that we saw near the Forum. Dedicated to the two patron saints of medicine, with the big mosaic from the sixth century. What's the name of that church? Does anybody remember? Starts with a C. Well, somebody has to look it up, because I don't want to give it to you. Can you remember the names of any of the churches? Just shoot off any names of churches you remember. What did we see last week? We saw last week Santa Maria in Trastevere. What else did we see last week? The patron saint of music?
Santa Maria in Trastevere?
That's one that we saw last week. The other one dedicated to the, as I said, the patron saint of music. Santa, where the last judgment of Cavallini was. What was the name of that church?
Was that the other Santa Maria? Or?
No, that wasn't Santa Maria. You guys don't remember the names of the churches we saw.
San Pietro?
Have we seen a church dedicated to St. Peter's?
Saints Cosmas and Damiano.
Cosma and Damiano. So the church of Saints Cosma and Damiano, that's the church near the Forum with the original mosaic from the 6th century, right? And it had the blue background. Remember the bird? What's the mythological bird that we saw? The phoenix was there, remember, and Christ gesturing, and St. Peter and St. Paul. And then the two guys, what were they holding that was the symbol of victory in ancient Rome, as well as in the laurel wreaths for victory as martyrs, right? So, okay. And then the background was this. What was the background? Blue, but not just blue.
Had like a galaxy kind of like.
Well, there's all the colors, because it was supposed to presumably be perhaps sunrise, right? Because remember, the sun rises in the east, rebirth. So, oh, look at perfect timing. Somebody put the money in. And exactly, what do you see? The same kind of thing. You can see the palm trees, and what's sitting in the palm tree up there? On the left. The phoenix. And it's a copy of Cosmo Damiano. And the idea is that this too is copied from those earlier centuries. So clearly, the artists that made this, they copied that earlier version, and quite faithfully, right? So now, in this period, for those reasons that we've talked about earlier, the Arab expansion, the iconoclastic upheavals, a lot of Greek artists came to Rome. So from the same period, some artists were working on that mosaic, and then there's this chapel over here. Okay, first of all, come here in front of me. Come all the way over here. Okay. Now, I want to do a little exercise just based on all of your experience in this class. We've talked about all these different things that you can look for that can help you date things, stylistic adjectives that describe them, phenomena from the past. Look at everything that you see right here. Can you think of think of some of the adjectives that describe it, and some of the elements?
Greek.
Okay, well, why? Okay, Greek, why?
Eyes are massive.
Huh?
The eyes
The big, yeah, well, look at the Christ up there, absolutely, yeah. And then there's also, what else makes it the Byzantine style? It's not just the big eyes. The frontal aspect, yeah. And then hieratic again is this idea of status. You have Christ, the Virgin, and then these saints, and they all look like princesses. And then also remember, it's the way they're dressed too. So you have different elements that all tell you, that give you the information, the way they're dressed, the style of the clothes, right? Now, what else can we tell about this period? Look at the rest of the elements, all this stuff. What does this stuff tell you? Like this big piece of what is that? That's a big piece from where? Where is it from, do you think?
Mantle.
Huh?
Mantle.
Again?
A mantle.
It's a piece of a cornice, you know, but where's it from, do you think? What was it part of? Is it originally for this? So?
Roman.
Yeah. So it's a piece of a Roman building that was reused here, right? And I'm sure that vase comes from an earlier place as well. Okay, this is called the Chapel of Saint Zeno, Z-E-N-O, Saint Zeno. And it's considered the most perfectly Greek-style mosaic in Rome. And it's it's the same period, 9th century. Well, 900 would be technically the 10th century, but let's just say about 900. All right, so now let's go in, but I don't know if I've got a euro. Anybody have a euro? Because I'm afraid I don't think I have a coin. Who wants to kick down today? Anybody? Oh, wait. You got one? Thanks. Okay, you guys. Oh, that's nice. Here, take a look at it. You should take some pictures of this while it's lit up. All right? Okay, and then when you're done, come on in here. Okay, come all the way in. Come further in. Come all the way in, fellows. Okay, now if you look back, you see the two saints, Peter and Paul, again, and they're gesturing towards the chair. And the chair is the throne of Christ. So where is Christ? He hasn't come back yet. So this is an indication of this idea of the return of Christ, the end of time, which is also called parousia. Parousia you spell like apparition. P-A-R-O-U-S-I-A, another great Greek word, the parousia, the return of Christ. So there's a cross on the throne. Right? Now the ceiling is really unique. You have Christ in the middle in this medallion, but look at the overall layout. There's something about it that I don't think we have never seen anywhere. What's particular about it? Look at the angels. What are they doing? I mean, physically, what are they doing? They're holding him up. They're suspending with their arms, so they become almost part of the architecture. And this is based on an architectural motif which goes into your categories of architecture called caryatid. It sounds like some kind of grasshopper, but a caryatid is spelled C-A-R-Y-A-T-I-D, caryatid. Caryatids, or caryatids, is a form of a column that's in a human form. And it goes back to a myth of the caryatids, and you can see this in that book that I made available to you on our resource page, the Lempriere's Mythological Dictionary. If you look up caryatid, it'll be described there. They were people who were condemned to hold up the universe or the sky, I can't remember exactly, So you see these oftentimes female figures, and the top of their head, right above it, is the architrave. So this is kind of on that idea, holding it up like a caryatid. Okay. And lastly, the style of the room is based on on mausoleums, like a tomb. So it has that style as well. And that's presumably the person the one who's alive, you know. So that's all I have to say about this. Now, jumping ahead, you can come and take a look. Actually, no, I don't need to go in there. You guys go look. I want you to date that. Look at this tomb right here, and tell me if you can give me an approximate date regarding the style. Like what? It's obviously a very different period. First of all, just eliminate. Is that ancient Rome? And you guys that are in the back, you'll have to go closer to get a good look. So once you guys have taken a good look, come out and let other people take a look. So what's this? Yeah, go take a closer look. So what style is that? What period do you think that is? If you had to guess.